saying that, okay, the economy will play just a minor little part, like running water, tap water, becomes a utility, something that's not really central to our lives. When the economy, businesses, work, that's a good mechanism for status. We all want to get in there, make careers, we increase status, we make money. It's such an integral part of at least male behavior. How can it be, how do you think it's possible that it becomes just a little sideshow of our lives?
Well, I think because it will be cheap. Economics will be cheap.
Yeah, but let me interrupt here. Some empirical thing here about very nice ideas. But let's put some rigor here. The world today is richer. We all agree, plus or minus a few countries, than it has ever been. No? Okay. So you would say that if we follow the ideal model of people who say, okay, economic life is a servant to our real aspiration, we'd be working less, we'd be enjoying life more, we'd be less concerned about the economy, we wouldn't be talking about it, okay? It's the exact opposite. We have more debt than we ever had. Okay, so this is the problem. In fact, there's something very strange in the world. Everybody talks about famine. Everybody talks about malnutrition. If you count the malnutrition and people who die of famine, okay, they're about 4% in number of the people who die of overfeeding, right? So this is where we don't know how to handle. So it looks like so I was saying it's very nice, but if you look at empirically what's going on, it looks like we're more and more obsessed with economic talk. So we're not made to handle and it's going to get worse. It's just like if I believe if I think, read the mind of John Gray, he would share the idea that it's not going to get better. We're not going to go to the ideal state of saying we have enough.
Let me comment on that. I mean, I was very glad that Tomasz mentioned Maynard Keynes's economic possibilities of our grandchildren, and also John Stuart Mill, Stationary State, which was originally written in the 1840s. And in there, so it's a long time ago, in a sense, a brilliant observation. He imagined a society, his utopia, if you like, in which growth in the sense of the increase of production and consumption, and also, by the way, growth in the sense of human population, very important point, both for him and for Keynes, would stop, and the subsequent growth would be in the quality of life. Now, one of my comments on that is, that's one of the very, very few utopias that's not positively repugnant.
That's what?
Positively repugnant. Because one of the assumptions we make, I'm often accused of being a pessimist. Marxist-Leninist said to me, you're a pessimist, Charlie, a pessimist. Your view of what could have come about in the Soviet Union is infinitely worse than what did. Does anyone want to live in a society of the kind that Lenin dreamt of, where we're all egalitarian workers? The horrors of reality are actually more preferable to that. My point is that I think I share Nassim's doubts here. This idea of Mill's and of Keynes's is as remote or more remote than it was in 1848. We had a much smaller human population, far more people were dying of famine, far fewer people were obese, and at that time when you put it forward, everyone said it's impossible, it's far-fetched. And yet paradoxically, here we are, if you could bring Mill back, you could say there's enough wealth in the world, there are too many people, he would say. You'd be right, I think. But we're further from it than ever. So there's something in our relationship with the economy which is, in a sense, pathological.
Yeah, I mean, we have evidence of that. I mean, we have evidence of that from a lot of people preferences, where if you ask French workers what would you like to get in 1952, they all want 23% more on average, and then it's perfect. They want nothing more ever, right? And then you ask them in 1980, you get the same 22% more, and it'd be perfect. So it looks like it's simply because there's something called hedonic treadmill that has been documented. Hedonic treadmill means very simply that you think, oh, if I had 10% more income or $1 million, it'd be perfect. Then I give you the money, and I'm not going to give to you myself, or with me, all right? Someone gives you $1 million. Now, oh, another million and be perfect, no more, right? And this is a hedonic treadmill, okay? So you have to, and plus there's another treadmill that comes with it called social treadmill. Social treadmill, and it's very interesting because I experienced it myself with traders, and it was the topic of my first book with people who are real character, thinly disguised. A fellow builds a house next to you, all right? Massive, you know, four-car garage, something, you know, that kind of mansion. Now suddenly you feel poor again, okay? So no matter how rich you get, it's your neighbor who determines his house. So you have a race, an arms race, and if you look at evolution, evolution is based on arms race, right? The peacock, all kind of stupid things come out of evolution. So it looks like one is ingrained in history. We see it empirically everywhere. And this idea of humans, because reading John Stuart Mill and saying no more, this silly book by Bertrand Russell, okay, that we
Pursuit of Idleness.
The Pursuit of Idleness, because we're going to go for leisure. Is Bertrand Russell, about the interesting thing about it is everything he writes, you should read backwards and be perfect, right? So, especially in his comments on philosophers, whoever he trashes and something like that. So it's very strange. It's so strange that he got Wittgenstein. He liked Wittgenstein, maybe for the wrong reason, right?
Yeah, because
So-
he didn't understand.
Because he didn't understand it. So, but Bertrand Russell, the Pursuit of Leisure. So if you look empirically, so we have to work with that. So the idea that if I'm a John Grayist to talk about my idea of utopia, you got to exploit the diseases of humans, right, to make them better. Not work on this moralizing, you know.
Can I
thing, yeah.
add to that? I mean, I agree with that fully. I put it in this way. I know this sounds very counterintuitive and all, but we have a surfeit of ethics. We have too much ethics. The core of ethics is what Nassim described earlier, which is based in human sympathy and compassion, which is care for the weak and the frail. That's ethics, as well as keeping your word and being fair and honourable. But where ethics becomes overinflated, in the way that Nietzsche and others have described, is in prescribing a general ideal and requiring everyone to live in it.
Yes.
That's
That's a
another
via positiva. That's the difference
Yeah.
between via positiva and it's very, very interesting mathematically. Is that if you look at we don't realize that we are very, very good at eliminating unhappiness. The state can eliminate unhappiness, but it's very different from creating happiness. And the Enlightenment switch via negativa means removal of the stressor, removal of something bad. That's how we frame it. Is removal of a source of peddling issue, for example. That's the via negativa. So you're not improving things, you're removing what hinders the system from functioning properly. You're removing the criminals from society. That's via negativa. Via positiva is you're trying to enforce you have an idea, the state has an idea what we should be doing. We've been excellent historically in via negativa measures. If you take the 10 Commandments, 7 out of 10 are via negativa, but the ratio is even higher in the texts, right? What shouldn't you be doing? Don't kill your mother. You understand, right? It doesn't tell you buy flowers every Mother's Day for your mother at 9 o'clock. It's surprising.
just tell you be thin.
Yeah. So anyway, so this is the idea of via negativa. So as we're realizing, ethically, we're excellent at via negativa, but very bad at via positiva and forcing it on others. Sorry.
Yeah, but isn't this already sort of materializing? I like the point of too much ethics. I would also think that the point is that the economy is not depressed, it's manic depressed, and the mania is the problem more than the depression. But we already have a body of ethics that's telling us what to do. I think this is the perfect trick of economics. It pretends to be value neutral and resistance to ethics,
Yes.
while at the same time it actually dictates you its own body of ethics, with which you might, or don't have to agree. Some of it is good, some of it is interesting. But it's not true that economics is void of ethics and we need to input some ethics into it. We need to replace it or reduce it. If
The
it's
very
too much.
idea of efficiency can easily turn into a crass ethics.
Absolutely.
Especially when applied to institutions. I mean, if you look at actual real institutions, ones in which people do have skin in the game, they're full of waste. Nature's full of waste.
Yes, exactly.
And we don't look at them and say, well, we've got to take the waste out. That, by the way, has happened in my own country, in the United Kingdom. I've seen in my lifetime lots of institutions which, in one sense, worked very well. They did what People wanted them to do, they were valuable, they contributed to the life of society. But in another sense, they were wasteful. The BBC used to have a library which was free. That was decided to be wasteful. That was wasteful. So what they did was they threw out large amounts of what was in the library, which is a library of recordings in part, and they were irreplaceable. Then they attached, under a modernisation anti-waste program, they attached very high prices to borrowing anything from the library on the part of by BBC employees. So if a producer was producing a film or a radio program, they had to go and pay a large amount to borrow it. That was efficient. Which meant in practice, many of them told me, they actually went out onto the street and bought it more cheaply on if it existed anywhere. In a shop. So, in other words, you move from an institution which had grown up over many generations, which was wasteful, wasn't very expensive, by the way, on the other hand, it wasn't that expensive, but internally there was all kinds of waste, but which did what it did well. And you say, we must be efficient, that's a as Thomas has said, they would say that's a non-evaluatory, morally neutral kind of demand. What it was almost a kind of anti-sumptuary law Puritanism applied to institutions, which produces an institution which is impoverished because nobody can do anything anymore.
Yeah, but there's something actually empirically. You can notice, I mean, you can see it here, and it applied to Ticino. People come in Ticino with two lungs, no? They're born with two lungs, two kidneys. Okay, so there you go. This is evidence that, well, if an economist working for the BBC trying to streamline, a consultant working
let's take one of them out and sell it.
Exactly. Let's tell what lung, and now I'm using 5% of my lung capacity. So it's waste, all right? So there you go. So what happened is that you exit the gene pool with that. No, I'm not saying there is a redundant. I don't buy 4 copies of a newspaper. First, I don't buy newspapers. But you don't buy 5 times 5 newspapers, right? But there are things you should not optimize.
By the way, Wittgenstein said that a skeptic is someone who buys a second newspaper to see if what was in the first newspaper.
so maybe I should buy copies of the newspaper.
That's exactly the fallacy of David Ricardo, who said you specialize. Every country should specialize in doing its thing, and do it fully.
On that, I want to exactly bring that point of David Ricardo. If you let systems, probably, I'm going to say the truth now, first time, as classical an economist you can make it. Pure. The problem is that I'm a little more skeptical of some of the cut and paste they've done with their models. So if you take the model properly, David Ricardo said this country specializes in wine, the other and so on. If you take the model, you write it down, the price of wine, the price. I came from trading where we never trust models without perturbating them, injecting more randomness. In other words, the way I would treat it is I would take the price of wine, make it volatile, the price of wheat, make it volatile. So in other words, you don't take the assumptions for granted. You make these assumptions also variable because the environment is variable. It's called enriching the model, and it's totally consistent with it. Instead of doing what il letto di Procrusti, cut the person to fit the bed, you make the bed bigger to fit the person, okay? Simply, I spent the night at the hotel here, beautiful hotel, they didn't cut my legs because the bed was small, right? But the economists tend to do that methodologically, and they don't have to. So if you enrich the model a little bit, okay, so bureaucrat, they make it simple so bureaucrat can understand. You enrich it a little bit, you realize that all these paradigms, all these stories, like Ricardo, you have wine, you specialize in wine, you specialize in, okay. But what if there's a fatwa on wine in the West? What if the Ayatollah comes to Berlin and says, okay, fatwa on wine, right? What happens to the one who specializes in wine? He's starving. And effectively, anyone who knows history who should despise these models because Ireland specialized in, guess what, potatoes. And what happened to Ireland? 2 million people died. Actually, 1 million went to America. I don't know what's worse. But sometimes the population of Ireland today is 4 million, 4 or 5 million. So you realize specialization. So that's the problem. Redundancy, okay, functional redundancy is have more than one specialization. there's functional redundancy. And we look at it, the beauty of the redundancy example is that mathematically you can map debt. What if the Ayatollah comes to Berlin and say, okay, fatwa on wine, right? What happens to the one who specializes in wine? He's starving. And effectively, anyone who knows history should despise these models because Ireland specialized in, guess what, potatoes. And what happened to Ireland? 2 million people died. Actually, 1 million went to America. I don't know what's worse. But sometimes the population of Ireland today is 4 million, 4 or 5 million. So you realize specialization. So that's the problem. Redundancy, okay, functional redundancy is have more than one specialization. There's functional redundancy. And we look at it, the beauty of the redundancy example is that mathematically you can map debt as exactly negative redundancy. If you have 100,000 in a bank, 100,000 Swiss, of course, not in a bank, you have redundancy. If you borrow 100,000 from the bank, you have a debt. You see, it's the opposite of redundancy. If you have 2 kidneys, you have redundancy. If you sell your kidneys and have to borrow one every day to do dialysis because the economists say it's optimal, you are in debt. So this is where we can map it. And unfortunately, we have been moving away from redundancies. And it's normal that someone who doesn't have 2 kidneys would die, but we're not letting companies who made the mistake of having too much debt die. And that's the problem.
Yeah, so we can come nicely to this topic of utopia. Of course, I thought we were enough to be realistic, we're to be, utopian. And I really, idealistically think that we will be able to break out of this fetish, because you talk of debt, and this is a fine example of this subject-object reversal. In the beginning, deficits or inflation or any other tricks of the public economic policy looks like it's going to serve you. Deficit or any debt in the beginning looks like it increases your degrees of freedom. If you overuse it, fetishize it, subject-object occurs, and you become effectively slaves of that debt. You service debt. So today, our policies are not dictated of what we want, but dictated of what the market dictates. So we have become the slaves of debt, and if we don't de-fetishize that, and there's a couple of ways how can you do that quite easily, you end up exactly, under that, collapse. So in that, I don't think I'm completely idealistic in my belief that we can actually come to the point that we de-fetishize the economic.
The mechanism by which we have been able to control human stupidity is well known. It's called religion. And about every religion except...
Okay. Yes.
I haven't switched off.
You haven't switched off.
Okay.
That's right, Simona. Okay, say that again.
I don't believe humans can obey any instruction except via negativa, and it has to come from religion. So you tell them something. People believe that religions are about God or something like that. No. God was something added to make people follow stuff. And we know that from rituals. Rituals, deities emanate from rituals, or the rituals emanate from belief in deities. That we know empirically. But the interesting thing about religion is that take that. All right? First time, ban, Babylon, dead jubilees. Second time, Septuagint. Right? Neither Baldwin nor Linda Shelby. Third time, boom, ancient Greece, few times. Islam, okay, boom. Catholicism, Aquinas, right? Aquinas has a fatwa on that that's more severe than that of Islam. So if you're Catholic, you should, make your money. So why? Because only religion can effectively enforce, protect you from yourself, provided it has a minimum number of interdates. It has to have a minimum number. So the way you cannot go to utopia is closer to by use of religion for its real purpose, rather than have some civil servant who has to invent everything because you read Ricardo.
Yeah, but you don't need religion to tell us that death is dangerous. Now we know it. I mean,
No.
Rationally we know it.
Roth, you don't know it. The problem is, you know it, people forget. Listen, in America, we had the Great Depression. And you look at what happened with debt after that. It became taboo to borrow in America. after the Great Depression, and every grandmother would tell the grandchild, before I die, make sure you have 3 years of salary in the bank before you get married. That was the norm until people forgot. They went studied economics, and what do you do in school? The problem, the more you study, the more you break from the experience of the past.
Yeah.
This is why education, actually, it's another topic, but education has been, particularly in economics, and the Swiss were very smart about banking, learning apprentice, no break of the chain of learning that has for centuries, all right? The minute you guys started sending people to universities, have some nerd, 28-year-old, read a few books, teach them, you forget the past.
But would that be part of a utopia, John, to say, okay, no debt, strictly forbidden?
I think the utopia that I get from what we've been discussing up till now is that rather than thinking we can improve the human world by making people clever, we look back in the past and even into aspects of the present and realize that what makes the world better are institutions and practices that make human beings less credulous. And actually, I think we both agree on this, religion is an antidote to credulity. The more you take religion out of human life, the practice of religion, the more credulous people become. There are more people in Europe who believed in the euro than ever believed in the virgin birth. And in fact, to my mind, the virgin birth or the resurrection of the body was less incredible because it was supposed to be a miracle. I mean, the advantage of these old beliefs is they were explicitly said to be miraculous. Whereas someone believes that Albania and Switzerland, both Switzerland wisely kept out, and Switzerland and Germany and Greece and Cyprus and Malta, all these countries are going to exist under a single monetary regime. It's absolutely never happened in history before. And there are good reasons why it's not actually possible. That's a far more fantastic belief than anything in religion. So in fact, I mean, in a way, maybe the utopian thing is to think that we can recover some of the anti-utopian practices of the past, including religions, as long as we separate religion, as I think Nassim has said, actually, not only from God, but even from belief. Religion isn't really about beliefs.
Yeah, that's a pisteo, the credere.
Yeah.
When you do credere, all right? The credere
That's a
isn't
point.
belief, it's epistemic, it's functional, right? I have trust that you will
Trust.
give me this, so it's a trust, not.
You can see this perfectly in, the name of the crisis in the beginning was credit crunch, so, that's a faith crunch. It was a trust crunch. It wasn't a normal business, reaction to the lack of growth. It was a religious disappointment of religious nature. And let me sort of demonstrate my point on interest rates. For example, interest rate was something that was always an ethical or religious topic. So religion and ethics dealt with the idea of interest rate, like Thomas Aquinas and others, and whatever their conclusion was is irrelevant, but it was a topic of theology. Now it's a topic of economics. So today we look on interest rates as if it's perfectly devoid of any ethical context. It is a stuff for economists, and it is stuff made of numbers, and it's an analytical, rigorous dictate that you can't even, do something against. It is as if divine. Interest rate levels are divine. My point is that it still is, no matter how hard we try to make it an analytical subject, it still is fuzzily, let's say, ethical. First, and secondly, we understand interest rate, we don't understand interest rate. This is what Aristotle, or even others, Old Testament, the Holy Quran, Vedas, Hammurabi Codex, everybody was very cautious about the interest rate, basically saying we don't understand what it does, drive it cautiously. We build our system on the pillar of interest rates, but trying to avoid it of all other contexts, which I think exactly is a mistake. And my final point here is, just because it doesn't look like a belief doesn't mean that it isn't a belief. So today we live in most ideological, I would say, time of ever, because before our ancestors were aware of what it is that they believe. Today we no longer are aware of what it is that we believe. We think it's a fact. So we bought the ideology in its home run. It's sort of not even considered it as an idea.
The way I put this very same point that Thomas has just made is when you're inside a myth completely,
Yes,
everything in the myth looks like a fact.
precisely.
The interesting thing about religions is that they've always gone along with profound doubt. I mean, if you go back to Augustine, and even before, or well before, the Jewish thinkers before Augustine, what they say is, for example, the Genesis myth is not a literal statement of fact. It's a way of expressing through a story something we can't express in other ways. So actually, faith, in the sense of trust in religion, trust in certain practices and institutions and certain images and symbols, has always gone with deep doubt. But when you dislocate religion, you try and repress religion and get rid of it or replace it with something more efficient, right? What happens is the myths you get instead are ones that those inside the myth think are facts. Whereas the more genuinely religious people know that their beliefs are very questionable, but carry on with it.
There's actually something quite central about skepticism. If you look at history of skepticism, we have ways to spread skeptics. So there's a crowd now composed of people with very little mathematical knowledge, like Dawkins, and then making mathematical statements of probability and little historical knowledge. Talking about skepticism. David Hume was a skeptic. The long tradition of that skepticism, skeptical empiricism, isn't about doubting tradition and religion. You go with it. You know what it is about doubting? The expert. If you look at Sextus Empiricus, okay, against the Mathematicos, the grammarian, it's exactly the point. The point is he's doubting the expert. And effectively, I remember I got a lot of hate mail, and usually the ratio of hate mail is indicative of the importance of an idea, by saying that you're doubting the bishop. Okay, that was in 2004 when it started, but they believe the security analyst. Okay, how harmful is a bishop going to be for your life? Think how much harm the security analyst can cause. All right. So when you look at, if you weigh things by harm, the doubting, and then the other thing is they use evolution to go against religion, when in fact if you use evolution properly, you realize that every population has evolved some kind of mechanism that has religion at its core, okay, for conduct. Why? Because to create heuristics of conduct we can't otherwise. And that's one point. The other one I want to say about interest rates is that the interesting thing about Islam is I went deeply into Islam. Why do they ban interest? In fact, they're not banning interest. They're banning one thing. The foundation of the principle is as follows. You can do whatever you want, but I cannot in a transaction make money if you don't make money. So if I lend you money and you lose money, you shouldn't be forced to pay me interest. And if you make money, I gotta make money. All right. So it's called sharing. So therefore, if any transaction, the only thing they require is in a commercial transaction. If I lend you for personal reasons, you lend, no interest. But in a commercial transaction, you should have skin in the game. In other words, the lender and the borrower should always share the same type of outcome. And this is where it becomes anti-credit.
Tell us about it, because that skin in the game thing is quite important for a future economic system or a future economic practice. Tell us again.